I grew up with a constant sense of being overlooked. At the dinner table, it was always about Luke. If he made a small achievement, it was praised to the skies. If I did something significant, it was barely acknowledged. No matter how hard I worked or how much I tried to get my parents' attention, it always felt like I was invisible. I remember one night at dinner when Luke was just 16, he had been invited to some exclusive event, and my parents couldn't stop talking about it. It wasn't even a big deal, but to them, it was like he'd just achieved something monumental. I sat there, trying to get involved in the conversation, but it was like I wasn't even in the room. "Mark, are you listening?" my mom asked, snapping me out of my thoughts. "Yeah, I'm just thinking about school," I said, forcing a smile. Luke looked at me, smirking. "You mean about how you're failing another class?" he teased, his voice dripping with sarcasm. I felt the blood rush to my face, but I didn't say anything. It wasn't worth it. He always had that power over me, the ability to make me feel small without even trying. And my parents, they didn't even flinch. They just laughed along with him. I started retreating more and more. If I wasn't being noticed, then maybe I should just make myself disappear. I began spending long hours in my room, burying myself in books, trying to focus on something, anything that would give me a sense of purpose. But it was never enough. I was 18 when I first felt the pull to leave. It wasn't just a fleeting thought, it was a necessity. I had received my scholarship acceptance letter, and for the first time, I felt like there was a way out. But I knew the moment I left, it would be forever. One evening, after another long day of being ignored, I packed a small bag, knowing that I couldn't stay any longer. My parents were out, and Luke was at some party, probably bragging about the latest attention he'd gotten. It was just me in that empty house. I sat down, on my bed, staring at my phone. There was a text from my mom asking how school was going. I paused before I deleted it, the decision feeling final in a way that almost scared me. I didn't respond. I didn't even leave a note. I just walked out. When I finally reached college, I felt a sense of relief. I was in control of my life. Now, I didn't have to pretend. I didn't have to beg for attention. It wasn't easy at first. I was alone. I missed the security, the familiarity of home. But I knew I had made the right choice. I worked my ass off. I didn't party like the others. I studied. I built my future. I had been in college for a few months when the first check arrived. My father, Thomas, was still sending money, convinced that I was in a local school, struggling, like he assumed I was. I didn't need it, but I kept it, just so he didn't suspect anything. But it wasn't until that one phone call that everything changed. "Mark," Dad's voice crackled over the line. "I'm canceling your registration. For this semester, you need to learn the consequences of not coming to Luke's wedding." I froze. "What do you mean? I'm not in college, Dad." There was a long pause on the other end. "What do you mean you're not in college? What have you been doing?" I let out a long breath. It felt like I was holding something heavy in my chest. "I graduated, Dad. I'm working. I'm making six figures. I didn't need your money to get through college." The line was silent for a moment, and then it exploded. "You. What? You've been lying to us this whole time? All those years, and you couldn't even tell us the truth?" I could hear the fury in his voice, the sense of betrayal that he was so quick to claim. But I was beyond caring. "I didn't need to lie, Dad. You never noticed me anyway. You were always too focused on Luke." There was a crackling sound, and then he shouted, "How dare you! After everything we've done for you, this is how you repay us." "I'm not repaying anyone, Dad. I'm done." I hung up before he could say anything more. I should have expected that call to be just the beginning. The next day, my father was at my door. "Mark," he said, his voice tight with emotion, "you're making a mistake. We're a family. You need to come to Luke's wedding. It's important. I stared at him, my heart racing. No, I don't owe you anything. You've never treated me like family. You've always had your favorite, and that's been enough for you. He looked taken aback, but quickly recovered. You don't know what you're talking about. You think we've favored Luke. You're wrong. We've always done our best to provide for you. I don't care about your best, I snapped. You never cared. You've always been so blind to the way you treated me. His face hardened. You're making a huge mistake, Mark. I've made my decision. I'm not going to your son's wedding, and I'm not going to be part of this family anymore. I shut the door in his face. That was the last time we spoke. Weeks passed and I tried to move on, but then my phone rang again. This time, it was my mother. Mark, please, her voice cracked. We miss you. Your father and we're struggling. Please, just come home. We need you. I hesitated, my heart torn. I had spent years pushing away these feelings, trying to be strong. But now, hearing her voice, there was a part of me that wanted to reach out. Still, I kept my distance. Why now, Mom? Why after all these years? We're not asking for much. Just a little help, Mark. Please. I closed my eyes, knowing something was off. I'm not coming back, but she wouldn't give up. A few days later, she showed up at my door. Mark, please, you have to help us. We're losing everything, she begged. I stood there, looking at her, the woman who had never fought for me, never stood up for me when I needed her. I'm not your safety net, I said, voice steady. I'm not going to fix your mistakes. She turned to leave, but there was something in her eyes. Guilt? Regret? Maybe. But it wasn't enough for me to give in. Weeks turned into months. My life continued as planned, focused, detached, and distant from the chaos that had once been my family. But they didn't let up. They tried different tactics, but I was resolute in my decision. Then, one day, as I was returning home from work, I saw my father standing outside my apartment building. He was pacing back and forth, clearly agitated. I stopped in my tracks, my heart pounding. Dad, I said, taking a deep breath before approaching him. What are you doing here? He looked up, his face lined with frustration. I'm here to talk, Mark. We can't keep doing this. I glanced around, hoping no one would overhear. But I couldn't escape this confrontation. I told you already. I'm not coming back. I'm done with all of you. He stepped closer, his voice quiet, almost pleading. I know I've made mistakes, and I'm sorry. But you're my son. I can't lose you. I felt a wave of emotion rise in me, but I fought it back. You don't get to just apologize when things go wrong, Dad. You've never seen me, never cared to. It's too late for that now. His eyes softened for a moment, and for the first time I saw the cracks in his usually tough exterior. You think it was easy for me, Mark? Trying to balance everything? Trying to keep things together? I shook my head. It's not about what's hard for you. It's about what you did to me. You ignored me my whole life. How could you expect me to just forgive that? He didn't have an answer. Instead, he just stood there, looking like a man who'd lost his way. A few weeks later, just when I thought they had given up, my brother Roman showed up at my door. I opened it, and there he was, looking smaller than I'd ever seen him. His usual arrogance was gone. He seemed broken. Mark, he said, his voice cracking. I need to talk to you. I stood still, unsure how to respond. Roman had never really been interested in talking to me unless it involved his own gain. What do you want? I asked, keeping my distance. I've messed up, man, he said, his voice full of regret. I didn't see it before, but I do, now. Everything I've done, it's wrong. I hurt you, and I'm sorry. I stared at him, waiting for the punchline. Roman had always been the golden boy, the one who could do no wrong in our parents' eyes. He was the one who got everything he wanted, and yet here he was, pleading. Why now, Roman? I asked, my voice cold. Where was this apology when I needed it? Where was it when you bullied me, when you took everything from me? He took a deep breath, stepping closer, his eyes desperate. I didn't know any better, but I do now. I I lost everything. The money, the respect, my life. I'm sorry for how I treated you. Please, just forgive me. For a moment, I almost gave in. But then I remembered all the years of torment, all the ways he'd made me feel worthless. I shook my head, pushing the door to close. I can't forgive you, Roman. Not for what you did to me. Not now. He reached out, grabbing the doorframe. Please, Mark, please. I know it's too late, but I want to make things right. I've been a terrible person. I could see the tears in his eyes, but I didn't feel pity. I felt anger. I've spent my whole life trying to prove I was worth something to this family. And you were the one who made me feel invisible. I'm done with you. I'm done with all of you. I slammed the door in his face, the finality of it hitting me harder than I expected. Days passed, and the weight of my decision still lingered, but I knew it was the right one. I had cut off all ties. They had taken advantage of me for far too long, and now I was living on my terms. But life has a funny way of showing us just how deep the wounds go. One evening I received a call from my aunt, Clara. Mark, I need to tell you something, she said urgently, her voice trembling. It's about Roman and the wedding. I frowned. What is it now? They took everything. All. The money. Your parents' savings. They've been stealing from the family for years, and now it's all gone. Your parents have lost everything. I sat down, stunned. What? How could they? They've been running scams, convincing everyone to invest in fake businesses. It was all part of Roman's plan. And now, because of it, your father's business is ruined. They're losing the house. The shock hit me like a ton of bricks. My first instinct was to feel vindicated. The family that had always mistreated me, the ones who thought they could control me, were now facing the consequences of their actions. But as I processed the news, a strange sadness washed over me. I'd always wanted to escape this cycle, but I didn't want to see them fall apart. Like this, I felt a pang of guilt, but I pushed it aside. I should have known better than to let them back into my life. It had been months since I cut ties with my parents, and the weight of that decision had begun to settle in my chest. I had found a certain peace in the absence of their presence, but that peace was quickly shattered. One cold evening when the doorbell rang. When I opened the door, there they were, my parents, standing in the dim light of the porch, their faces full of desperation. My father's hands were wringing together nervously, and my mother's eyes were swollen from what looked like hours of crying. Mark! My mother's voice cracked. Please, we need to talk. I froze. Part of me wanted to slam the door in their faces. I had made it clear I wanted nothing to do with them. But here they were again, showing up uninvited, like they had the right to demand answers from me. It wasn't just the betrayal of the past that hurt anymore. It was the fact that they hadn't learned a thing. Not a single thing. What is it? I said, my voice colder than I intended. I didn't want to hear their excuses. I didn't want to hear more lies. Please, Mark, my father spoke this time, his voice shaking with frustration. We lost everything. The house, the business. It's all gone. We're struggling, and we need your help. I felt the sting of their words hit me, but it wasn't because of the financial burden they were carrying. It was the same pattern. Whenever they were in trouble, they came crawling back to me, like I was supposed to be their savior. I wasn't a safety net for them. Not anymore. Is that what this is about? Money? I asked, my voice rising, the anger building up inside me. We don't just need money, Mark. We need our family back. We've lost everything and we need you. My mother pleaded, stepping closer, reaching out as if trying to bridge the emotional gap between us. Do you even hear yourselves? I said, shaking my head. You think you can just show up and expect me to forgive you after everything that's happened? You treated me like I didn't matter for my whole life, and now you want me to play the hero and fix everything. They looked at each other as if my words had hit them harder than they'd expected. My father opened his mouth to speak, but nothing came out. It was as if he didn't know what to say anymore. The manipulation, the gaslighting, none of that was working on me now. You want to know why I walked away? I said, my voice calm but cutting. I did it because I couldn't stand being treated like I wasn't enough. I couldn't stand being ignored, belittled, always in Roman's shadow. You made me feel like I didn't deserve anything. My mother flinched, her face twisting with guilt. But it wasn't enough. It wasn't enough to undo all the damage they had caused. I had spent years trying to prove myself to them, to seek their approval, and in the end, all I got was disappointment. You and I will have... Think I haven't noticed? I continued, my emotions now boiling over. Roman gets everything. He's always been the golden child. And you've always expected me to just accept it. Well, I won't. I'm not the one who failed here. You are. There was a long silence, broken only by the soft sound of the wind rustling through the trees outside. My father looked at me, his eyes filled with a mixture of anger and desperation. You don't understand, Mark. This is all your fault. If you had just been there, if you had been part of the family, we wouldn't have lost everything. It was the same story. Always blaming me for their mistakes, their failures. I was done. No, you're wrong, I said firmly, my voice cold as ice. You lost everything because you never learned how to be a family. You pushed me away when I needed you, and now you want me to fix it? It's too late for that. My father's face reddened with rage. I don't want to hear this from you anymore. I tried to help you, and now you're acting like I'm the villain? No, I said, my voice shaking slightly. You're not the villain. You're just the person who failed me. And I'm not going to let you do it anymore. I'm done. The words hung in the air, final and cutting. It wasn't easy, but I knew it was the only way. They needed to understand that I wouldn't tolerate this anymore, that I wasn't going to allow them to pull me back into their toxic web. My mother's eyes filled with tears. Mark, please, don't leave us. We're your family. We love you. I stood there, staring at them, my heart breaking. But I had to be strong. I had to walk away. For me. For my own sanity. And I couldn't do that if I kept holding onto the hope that they would change. I'm sorry, I said softly, stepping back. But this is over. You've had your chance. I closed the door, my heart pounding in my chest. As I leaned against the wall, a wave of exhaustion washed over me. I had done what I needed to do. I had set the boundaries I had been too afraid to set before. But as I stood there in the quiet of my apartment, the weight of it all sank in. I wasn't sure if I had made the right decision, but I knew one thing. I would never go back. The days following my decision were a strange mix of relief and despair. On one hand, I felt free, as if a weight had been lifted off my shoulders. I was no longer shackled by the emotional burden my family had placed on me all those years. But on the other hand, there was a deep loneliness, an emptiness that seemed to follow me everywhere. I wasn't surrounded by the pressure of trying to please, trying to earn acceptance. But now, I had to face their absence, and it was harder than I ever imagined. Weeks passed slowly. I kept going to work, doing my tasks, but there was always a vacant space inside me. The absence of them, the lack of that family dynamic I'd always known, began to settle heavily on my chest. There were nights when I sat on the couch, alone, thinking about the conversations that would never happen, the moments I would never share. What would have been different if I had accepted Roman's apology? If I had given my mother a chance when she showed up at my door, desperate? But deep down, I knew it was the only choice I could make. I needed peace. I needed to find my own identity without the constant shadow of comparison and familial expectations. That peace, however, didn't come easily. That night, months after the last encounter with my mother, I found myself staring at the photos on my wall. Old portraits, full of fake smiles, memories of times that now seemed distant and unreal. I hadn't taken them down yet. Part of me was still clinging to the illusion that things could have been different, that there was a version of me that could have belonged with them. But that version didn't exist anymore. The person I had been, the one who constantly sought validation and approval, was gone. As I looked at those pictures, memories began flooding my mind. The countless times my father had dismissed me, Roman's taunts, my mother's silence when I needed her the most. They were all a part of the past now, but the scars they left were still there, hidden deep within me. I closed my eyes, feeling a wave of sadness wash over me. For a moment, I almost regretted everything. I questioned whether I had made the right choice, whether I could have done more, been more. But as the thoughts lingered, I realized something. I had been given a gift, a chance to finally live for myself, to be the person I always wanted to be, without the weight of their expectations holding me back. I exhaled slowly, pushing away the guilt that crept in. I wasn't a villain. I wasn't abandoning them out of cruelty. I was saving myself. It wasn't selfish to want happiness, to seek peace. In that moment, the tension I had been carrying for so long began to dissolve. I wasn't letting go of them. I was letting go of the toxic grip they had on my life. I could still feel sadness for what we had lost, for the family that could have been. But I could finally acknowledge the truth. There was no going back. And perhaps that was the hardest part of all, accepting that I wasn't the one who had failed. They were. I woke up the next morning with a newfound sense of clarity. I didn't need them to validate me anymore. My worth wasn't defined by their opinions or the roles they had assigned me. I had created my own path, and it was enough. I walked into the kitchen, made myself a cup of coffee, and for the first time in a long while, I truly smiled. It wasn't because everything was perfect, but because it was real. I had finally chosen myself.